She had already lost the match before she won it. On center court, under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain, a 21-year-old from Quezon City stood facing the reigning Wimbledon champion, and somehow, that isn't even the most dramatic thing that happened to her this fortnight. What came next would rewrite the record books for an entire nation, and what came 4 days later would break hearts in a way no scoreline ever could. This is the story of Alex Eala's Wimbledon, and to understand why it mattered so much, you have to go back further than center court. Start with a preschooler on the shell courts of a country club in Pasig City, swinging a racket that looked almost too big for her. Tennis wasn't supposed to be her sport, not really. The Philippines has never produced a major singles champion, never had a real infrastructure for the game the way countries like Spain or the United States do. But her family had sport running through it anyway. Her mother was a national-level swimmer and a medalist at the Southeast Asian Games. Her brother played competitively too. And her grandfather, a man she still calls Lolo Bob, became her very first coach, showing up every single day after school to hit balls with her and her brother. He used to tell her something simple: be coachable, work with others, keep your feet on the ground. She has carried that lesson with her onto some of the biggest courts in the world. At 13, she left home. Not for a nearby academy, but for Mallorca, Spain, to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy, a decision that meant adapting to a new language, a new culture, and a training regimen built for players with far more resources behind them than a teenager from a country with no real tennis pedigree. It worked. In 2022, she won the girls' singles title at the US Open, becoming the first Filipino ever to capture a junior Grand Slam trophy. It was the kind of achievement that made people back home start paying attention to a sport most of them had never followed closely. Then came the breakthrough that actually changed everything: the 2025 Miami Open. Eala arrived as a wild card, ranked outside the world's top 100, and left as one of the biggest stories in tennis. She beat Katie Volanitz. She beat former French Open champion Yelena Ostapenko. She beat Madison Keys, the world number 5 at the time. She advanced to the quarterfinals and beat Iga Swiatek, yes, that Iga Swiatek, then the world number 2, in straight sets, becoming the first Filipino in the Open era to defeat a top 10 player, let alone a top 5 one. Rafael Nadal himself posted his congratulations online. She eventually fell to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals, but by then it didn't matter. A teenager from Quezon City had just forced her way into the conversation. The rest of 2025 kept building. A first WTA title. A run to her first WTA Tour final at Eastbourne, where she lost to Australia's Maya Joint. And then at the US Open, another slice of history, her first ever Grand Slam main draw win for the Philippines, a comeback from a set down and 1-5 in the decider against Clara Tauson, completed in front of a raucous crowd near Flushing Meadows, in a part of New York with a large Filipino community that showed up and made noise like it was a home match. She fell to the ground in disbelief when it was over. Afterward, she said representing her country made everything she did feel bigger than herself. By March 2026, she had climbed to a career-high world ranking of number 29, the highest any Filipino had ever reached in WTA history. And then Wimbledon arrived, and she walked in as the tournament's 29th seed, the first Filipina ever to be seeded at a Grand Slam. It didn't look like the start of something historic at first. In the opening round, Eala dispatched Renata Zarazua in straight sets, 6-1, 6-2, in just 78 minutes. Efficient, unremarkable, barely registering outside a results ticker. The second round was messy. Facing Maya Joint, the very player who had beaten her in that Eastbourne final the year before, Eala dropped the first set 3-6 and looked briefly like she might be heading out early. Then she reversed course entirely, winning the next 2 sets 6-2, 6-0, closing it out with a bagel in the decider and avenging that Eastbourne defeat in the process. It was the first sign of something the tennis world would see again and again over the next 2 weeks. Whatever went wrong in the first act, Eala found a way to rewrite the ending. Then came the third round. And this is where the story stops being just another good tournament and starts becoming something else entirely. Waiting for her was Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, one of the most dominant players of her generation. It wasn't the first time the two had crossed paths. 2 years earlier, Swiatek had actually attended Eala's graduation ceremony at the Rafa Nadal Academy, invited by Rafa himself. Now they were meeting again, this time across the net, with a place in the second week of Wimbledon on the line. The two players traded blows through a tight opening set that stretched deep into a tiebreak, neither one willing to give an inch, Eala saving break point after break point, refusing to let the moment overwhelm her. She won the tiebreak. Then she took the second set 6-2, and Iga Swiatek, the reigning Wimbledon champion, was out of the tournament in the third round. It cost Swiatek close to 1,870 ranking points and her place inside the world's top 10. For Eala, it was the single biggest win of her career, delivered on the sport's most famous court, against the woman who had lifted the trophy 12 months earlier. She could barely speak afterward. By her own account, she became emotional in her on-court interview, thinking back to the years of training with her brother and grandfather after school. And then, almost as quickly as the tears came, she caught herself and pushed back against the idea that emotion meant she was satisfied, as if to remind everyone watching, and maybe herself too, that this wasn't the finish line. Here's what makes that moment even bigger than it already looks. On that very same day at Wimbledon, another seeded former champion, Elena Rybakina, was also eliminated, beaten by Elise Mertens. The draw was being torn apart. The old order was slipping. And in the middle of that chaos stood a player from a country that had never had a representative reach the second week of a Grand Slam in the Open era. Eala had just made sure that history would never look the same again. The first Filipina to ever get there, the first player from the Philippines, full stop, to reach the fourth round of Wimbledon. There was no time to celebrate for long. 2 days later, back on center court, the draw handed her Jasmine Paolini, the 13th seed, a former Wimbledon finalist from 2024, a player who knew exactly what it took to go deep in this tournament and had already been there before. Earlier in the year, in Dubai, Eala had actually beaten Paolini in straight sets. This time, the story would end differently. Paolini struck first, breaking Eala's serve early in the opening set, building a 3-game surge, and closing it out before Eala could find her rhythm. It was the kind of start that could have buried a less composed player, especially one who had already spent an enormous amount of emotional capital just getting to this point in the tournament. But Eala didn't fold. She held serve, trimmed the deficit, and even carved out a break point of her own before the set slipped away. Then the match turned again. Because this tournament, this entire run, seemed built out of turns. In the second set, with Paolini surging ahead on Eala's own serve and threatening to end things quickly, Eala produced one of the most composed stretches of tennis in the whole match, 5 consecutive points to erase 3 break points in a row, holding for a commanding lead in a game that could easily have finished the match right there. She rode that momentum to close out the second set, forcing a decider. Center court, 1 set apiece, a place in the quarterfinals on the line. The third set stayed tight from the start. Both players traded holds through the opening games, the score locked, neither willing to blink. Eala even built an early lead in one crucial game, threatening to be the one who finally broke through. But Paolini, a player with a Wimbledon final already on her resume, found her composure at exactly the moment it mattered most, clawing back to hold and edge ahead. From there, the Italian closed out the match, and Alexandra Eala's historic Wimbledon run came to an end in the fourth round. It would be easy to frame that as pure heartbreak, and in the moment, it clearly stung. But watch what happened when she walked off that court. The crowd rose, and not politely, raucously. And Eala, rather than rushing off the way a devastated athlete sometimes does, stopped. She took a solemn moment to acknowledge the people who had been cheering for a name most of them had never even heard of 2 weeks earlier, and she shaped her hands into a heart, directed back at the stands. It was a small gesture. It said everything. In her press conference afterward, there was no bitterness, no excuses about the scoreline, no attempt to rewrite what had just happened on court. She spoke instead about what the tournament had given her, the confidence of knowing she could compete at this level and win, regardless of how the final match had gone. She talked about the pressure of playing a Grand Slam second week for the first time, and how proud she was of staying composed under it. She described the fortnight as a roller coaster, one that had tested her and rewarded her in equal measure, and she credited the people around her, her team, the support that had carried her through the tougher stretches of the season, for helping her get to this point at all. The numbers alone tell you how big this run really was. Reaching the fourth round earned her 240 ranking points, pushing her total up to 1,666 and lifting her 4 spots to a projected new career high ranking of world number 28. She became the first Filipina in the Open era to reach the round of 16 at a Grand Slam. She became the first Filipino tennis player, man or woman, to be seeded at any of the 4 majors. And somewhere in the royal box that same week sat Roger Federer himself, watching a 21-year-old from Quezon City write a new chapter into the history of a tournament he once dominated. Back home, none of this happened in a vacuum. Tennis has never been a major sport in the Philippines, but Eala's rise has started to change that in real time, drawing comparisons to national icons like Manny Pacquiao and turning her into something close to a symbol of national pride. Wherever she plays, Filipino fans have shown up in numbers, filling stands with flags and banners referencing home, treating her matches almost like home fixtures no matter how far from Manila they actually are. She has said more than once that representing her country adds a weight and a meaning to her tennis that goes beyond her own personal goals, even as she insists that the hardest part of every milestone is still the work she put in to get there. Success at this speed has not come without noise. Because her family has resources and connections that most young Filipino athletes simply don't have, some critics online have tried to wave away her rise as a product of privilege rather than talent, tossing around the label of a favored child of a well-off family. Her supporters point to the scoreboard instead of the argument: a junior Grand Slam title, wins over top 10 and now top 3 opponents, a Grand Slam 4th round few could have scripted. Money can buy access to an academy. It cannot buy the composure to erase 3 break points in a row against a former Wimbledon finalist with a place in the quarterfinals on the line. Whatever conversation swirls around her off the court, the tennis itself has settled the argument for her, 1 round at a time. Her team has grown around her the way any serious contenders does. A coach with a resume that includes work with a former world number 1 and Spain's Davis Cup program has guided her preparation and her mindset on tour. A fitness coach from the academy oversaw her conditioning specifically ahead of the Swiatek match, the kind of unglamorous background work that never makes a highlight reel but shows up exactly when a third set tiebreak is on the line. And through it all, her grandfather's early lessons about staying coachable and staying grounded have followed her from the shell courts of Pasig City all the way to center court. She has already said what she wants her run to mean beyond her own results. Speaking previously about her role for young players across Asia, she said she hoped more players from the region would keep believing anything is possible, urging them, her words, to dream big. Wimbledon 2026 didn't just add a career-high ranking or a 4th-round finish to her resume. It gave an entire generation of Filipino kids and plenty of other young Asian players watching from outside the traditional tennis powerhouses a very specific image to hold on to. A 21-year-old crying real tears on the most famous court in the sport, having just beaten the woman who won the tournament the year before. None of that happened by accident, and none of it happened quietly. It happened across years of early mornings with a grandfather-turned-coach, a teenage decision to move across the world alone, and finally 2 weeks of tennis that took her from a solid but still rising world number 32 to a name that will now be permanently attached to Wimbledon's record books, to a nation's sporting history, and to a version of herself that even she seemed surprised to discover in real time. The version that could beat a defending champion on center court and cry not because she lost, but because she had never quite let herself believe she could win that big. Consider, for a moment, the distance she covered to get here. 2 years earlier she was a promising junior with a US Open girls title and not much of a track record against the professionals. A little over a year before Wimbledon, she was a wild card entering a WTA 1000 event ranked outside the top 100. Someone tournament organizers gave a spot to more out of curiosity than expectation. She left that event as a name every serious tennis follower suddenly knew. Every step since then, from Eastbourne heartbreak to a US Open comeback completed in front of a crowd that treated Flushing Meadows like a Manila stadium, from a career-high ranking in March to a Wimbledon seeding in July, reads like a deliberate staircase rather than a lucky bounce. Wimbledon 2026 wasn't a random peak. It was the logical next step for a player who had been quietly rewriting what was possible for Filipino tennis for 2 straight years. The loss to Paulini will sting, the way every loss at this level stings. But it isn't really the ending of this story, and it never was. The ending is a heart shape drawn in the air on center court, a projected ranking of world number 28, and the quiet knowledge that whatever comes next in Alex Eala's career, Wimbledon 2026 will always be the fortnight where the impossible started to look normal. She said it herself, without needing to dress it up. This is the kind of week that adds to your confidence forever, whether it ends in a trophy or not. For a player who had never been seeded at a major, never reached a second week, never beaten a defending Wimbledon champion, she leaves London having done all 3, and she leaves knowing the next chapter is hers to write.